Speaking of the ACWW.
Yes, it's a lot easier than the full word.
Exactly. You just had a conference?
Yes, the World Conference. It's been in Coventry in the UK. It's held every 3 years. In 2019, it's actually in Melbourne, Australia, so it's a lot closer to home.
That'll be cheaper for you.
It will be. But yes, we've had a delegation at the World Conference from New Zealand, from Rural Women New Zealand, because we are affiliated to that, which is really great because it allows the women of New Zealand to also have a voice on that global stage, which is really good.
You looked at food?
We did look at food. A lot of the discussions were around sustainable agriculture, food sovereignty, which is all around ensuring land tenure, access to resources and water and everything you need for maintaining good, healthy food and the right to grow food. Because we must remember that we must remember there's a lot of women around the world who don't have access to land. They're not entitled to own land, not entitled to manage money, and they don't have the access to the resources to grow food for their families. So we were trying to encourage the governments of the world to make sure that women have the opportunity and the right to grow food for their families, and it's in a sustainable way that gives them food security, so they can be sure they're always going to have food for their families.
Must be pretty tough for a widow.
It is, very much so. There are countries, Africa, even in the Pacific, where the women don't have the right to own the land, and once the husband dies, they lose their right to the land. So very, very challenging for them in terms of looking after their families. So this was a huge issue for us to ensure that...
You've taken off a pretty big chunk, haven't you?
We have. So,
sustainable energy.
Sustainable energy, yes, of course. Many of the forms of creating energy are actually polluting the world in terms of coal and gas and things. And so we're looking at trying to create more sustainable energy forms. And it's one of the Sustainable Development Goals is ensuring that the world develops sustainable, ongoing access to good energy.
And what about things like water? I mean, that's a huge issue, isn't it?
It is, and protecting the water resource, because there's so many demands on water, as we know here in New Zealand. It's a constant challenge for us here as well, and we must realise that very little of the water that is actually used for drinking. It's used for all kinds of things: food production. It's used for washing the dishes, having a shower, washing the car, doing the laundry. The actual amount of water you use in your home is actually very little of it's for drinking. So we need to protect that resource and encourage people to develop water-saving devices, water-saving systems, and ways that they can use the grey water instead of using our fresh water all the time, and also reducing anything that's going to pollute our water resource.
What about people's health? Do you cover that as well, sort of vaccinations and things?
We do. There's a number of diseases that are on the point of eradication, and if we can just keep our governments and health departments vaccinating against those, we can eliminate those. And that's things like polio. It's very close to being eliminated throughout the world, and we really want that to happen. So we're trying to encourage governments to keep those vaccination programs going.
Because we don't sort of think about polio in New Zealand.
No,
but we used to drink those little wee...
I know. We do, and smallpox is about the only disease that actually has been eradicated. We think even of tuberculosis as being gone, but we still see it. Even in New Zealand, it still occurs.
So things like the civil society and all that sort of thing comes under your umbrella as well?
It does. We talked a lot about gender equality and encouraging governments to ensure that gender is an aspect of all their policies and the development. And in terms of gender-friendly budgeting, which is about programs that support the empowerment and growth of women and women's initiatives, and removal of things that impinge on women's rights. It could be family violence, it could be access to finance, all those things that make the world a better place for women and children to live in.
As I said, you've bitten off a very, very big chunk.
I have indeed.
Kerry, thank you very much. And please, please, please keep us in touch with what's going on around the world.
Oh,